Welcome back to Payback Logs. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember, the people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. You're going to love it here. I've always believed that you can tell the moral health of a nation by the way it treats its mail. To most people, an envelope is just a piece of paper. To me, it's a federal contract. As a retired United States Postal Inspector, I spent 35 years enforcing the sanctity of the seal. I've chased everything from anthrax scares to international Ponzi schemes that spanned 6 continents, all because someone decided to use a stamp to commit a crime. In retirement, my life follows a very specific sorting process. Every morning at 10 a.m., I walk to the end of my drive. I check the hinges on my box. I retrieve the bundle. I take it to my sorting room, what my daughter calls the den, and I enter every piece into my daily mail log. I record the sender, the postmark date, and the zip code of origin. It's not obsessive, it's an audit, and an audit is the only thing that keeps the chaos of the world at bay. My son-in-law, Bradley, is the kind of man who thinks chaos is a business strategy. He's an insurance adjuster who wears suits that cost more than his monthly commission and drives a leased German SUV he can't afford. He looks at me and sees a fixed asset, a man with a military pension and a house that's been paid for since the Reagan administration. "Arthur, still playing postmaster, I see," Bradley said, walking into the den without knocking. He had that breezy, overfamiliar tone that usually precedes a request for a loan. "You know, Sarah and I were talking. All this paper, it's a fire hazard, not to mention the identity theft risk. We really need to get you simplified. Go paperless. I can handle the digital migration for you." I didn't look up from my log. I was recording a circular from the local hardware store. "I like paper, Bradley. Paper has a trail. Digital is just a ghost in a machine." "It's 2026, Arthur. Even the government is moving on," he said, leaning over my shoulder. He reached out to touch a stack of unopened envelopes, his fingers twitching with a greed he thought he was hiding. "I'll tell you what, I've got some time this weekend. I'll install a smart mailbox for you. It's got a camera, digital locks, only authorized users get a notification. It'll save you the walk." I like the walk. But the first crack didn't happen during that conversation. It happened 10 minutes after Bradley left. I was going through the final stack when I found a final notice for a life insurance policy. It was addressed to me, claiming I owed a premium of $450 for a senior protection plan I'd never heard of. I looked at the return address. It was a P.O. box in the 90210 zip code. I checked my log from 3 months ago. Bradley had mentioned he'd opened a satellite office in that exact area. Then I looked at the postmark. It wasn't processed through the main regional hub. It was dropped at a local kiosk. I picked up my magnifying loupe and looked at the canceled stamp. The ink was slightly smeared, the kind of smear you get when someone tries to reuse a stamp that didn't get a clear cancellation mark the first time. It's a petty crime, the kind of crime a desperate man does when he's nickel and diming his way through a larger fraud. Bradley wasn't just trying to simplify my life. He was using my name to generate zombie policies, life insurance scams where he collects the commission and bills the client, me, for the premiums. He forgot one thing. I don't just read the mail. I investigate it. I opened my black moleskin. Monday, 11:45 a.m. Subject, Bradley, attempted insurance fraud/mail tampering. Postmark zip 90210. Stamp, second use forgery. Narrative, the inspector is back on the clock. I'm going to let that sit for a moment. Keep listening. The smart mailbox arrived on Friday. Bradley installed it with the enthusiasm of a man who had just finished building his own gallows. He explained how the app on his phone would notify him of important documents so he could filter out the junk for me. He thought he had successfully severed my connection to the outside world. The simplification project moved into high gear over the next 2 weeks. Bradley began a campaign of subtle psychological erosion, designed to make my daughter, Sarah, believe I was no longer capable of managing a checkbook, let alone a federal pension. He started intercepting my military pension checks, the physical ones I still insist on receiving, at the local sorting facility by filing a temporary forwarding request in my name. In their place, he would deliver forged statement of benefits summaries he'd printed on high-end linen paper. "Arthur, I have some bad news," Bradley said one afternoon, sliding a sheet across the kitchen table. "I was checking your portal, and it looks like there's a massive clerical error at the VA. Your pension balance is showing 0 for the month, some kind of overpayment recovery thing." I looked at the paper. To the untrained eye, it looked official, but to a postal inspector, it was a crime scene. The font for the balance due line was 12-point Helvetica, while the rest of the document was in Calibri. He'd used a digital cut and paste tool, and he hadn't even bothered to align the margins correctly. "0?" I asked, putting on my best worried retiree face. I let my hand shake just a little as I touched the paper. "But Bradley, how will I pay the property taxes? Sarah said—" "Don't worry about Sarah," Bradley said, patting my hand. "I'll handle the taxes from our joint account for now. You just focus on, well, maybe finding your glasses. You've misplaced them 3 times today." I hadn't misplaced them. Bradley had moved them to the top of the refrigerator, then the bathroom cabinet, then the garage. He was trying to create a pattern of forgetfulness he could report back to Sarah. That evening, I heard them arguing in the hallway. "He's losing it, Sarah," Bradley whispered, his voice dripping with false concern. "He's spending hours in that sorting room recording the serial numbers on junk mail. He didn't even realize his pension check didn't come. I'm telling you, we need to take power of attorney before he accidentally signs the house over to a telemarketer." I sat in the dark of my study, holding a hidden burner phone. I had already set up USPS informed delivery on this secondary device. Every morning, the post office emailed me a grayscale image of the exterior of every piece of mail intended for my address. I watched the screen as a scan of my actual pension check appeared in the app, delivered to a P.O. box Bradley had opened under a synthetic identity using my Social Security number. He thought he was hiding the mail. He didn't realize that in 2026, the mail is photographed before it ever reaches the carrier's bag. He was stealing the physical paper, but I was collecting the digital evidence. I opened my black moleskin. Thursday, 8 p.m. Subject, Bradley. Interception of Federal Treasury check. Violation of 18 U.S.C. Section 1708. Confirmed gaslighting of secondary victim, Sarah. Narrative, the trap is being baited. I'm going to let that sit for a moment. Keep listening. The house was quiet. The only sound the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock. A sound Bradley likely found soothing, thinking it was the sound of my life winding down. I waited until I heard his SUV pull out of the driveway before I stood up. I didn't need to hunt for my glasses. I knew exactly where he'd hidden them this time, tucked behind the flour jar in the pantry. I descended the stairs to the sorting room. To Bradley, this was a den of senility. To me, it was a forensic lab. I locked the door and turned on the overhead fluorescent lights. They hummed with a comforting industrial drone. I walked over to the heavy oak cabinet at the back. I pulled out my old USPIS service box, the one I'd kept since the day I retired. Inside lay my gold shield, tarnished just enough to show the decades of service, and a framed photograph of Martha. She had been the postmaster in our little town for 30 years. "Arthur," she'd said to me once, back when we were investigating a mail-order pharmacy scam, "the world is full of people who think they can hide behind a stamp. They don't realize that every letter carries the soul of the person who sent it. You just have to know how to read the ink. Martha believed in the sanctity of the seal. She believed that when someone entrusts a letter to the government, it becomes a sacred object. Bradley wasn't just stealing my money, he was violating the very principle Martha and I had spent our lives defending. He was treating the U.S. mail like his personal ATM. I ran my fingers over the edge of my old badge. In the Postal Inspection Service, we have a saying, "The inspector always rings twice. The first ring is the warning, the second is the handcuffs." Bradley saw a man who was obsessed with paper. He failed to understand why. I spent my career in the golden age of mail fraud, where we had to use chemistry and intuition to solve crimes. I knew how to detect chemical erasures on money orders. I knew how to identify the specific drag of a forged signature. I looked at the forged statement of benefits Bradley had given me. I didn't need a lab to see the truth. I could feel it. The paper was too smooth. It was laser printed, not offset. The ink sat on top of the fibers rather than soaking in. It was a lie printed on 24-pound bright white. "He thinks he's playing with digital ghosts, Martha," I whispered to the photo. "He doesn't realize he's left a physical trail a mile wide." The air in the sorting room felt thick with the ghosts of 30 years of federal service. I wasn't just a grandfather anymore. I was a forensic specialist with a subject in his crosshairs. Bradley thought he was a ghost in the machine, but I was about to prove that he was still made of paper and ink. The investigation didn't require me to leave my chair. I started by using my hidden burner phone to access the USPIS mail management portal. Since I still had my emeritus credentials for certain historical databases, I was able to run a query on my own address. The data didn't just drip, it flooded. I found 3 separate PS Form 3575 change of address filings made in the last 60 days. All of them were filed online using a credit card registered to A. Sterling, except the IP address for the transactions originated from Bradley's home office. He was rerouting my correspondence to a commercial mail receiving agency, CMRA, 3 towns over. But the real smoking gun was on my workbench. I placed the linen paper Bradley had given me earlier into the ESDA, electrostatic detection apparatus. I applied the toner and the high-voltage charge. As the image developed, the ghost of Bradley's greed appeared. On the sheet above the forged statement, he had been practicing my signature. Even more damning, he had written down a list of debt targets, my $150,000 money market account, the title to my 1968 Mustang, and a series of payday loans he'd already applied for using a synthetic identity. A synthetic identity is a sophisticated fraud where a criminal combines real data, my social security number, with fake data, a different mailing address and phone number, to create a new person that credit bureaus can't easily flag. Bradley had created a new Arthur who lived at a P.O. box and was currently racking up $40,000 in high-interest debt. I sat back, the blue light of the ESDA screen reflecting on my glasses. In the federal system, mail fraud, 18 U.S.C. Section 1341, is a powerful catch-all statute. If you use the USPS to further a scheme to defraud, you aren't just a thief, you're a federal target. And because I was over 65, Bradley was looking at enhanced sentencing for elder fraud. I pulled up a spreadsheet on my laptop and began mapping the nexus of evidence. The postmark, tied to Bradley's satellite office. The forgery, confirmed by ESDA indented writing. The identity theft, confirmed by the synthetic credit profiles linked to his CMRA box. "You're a sloppy auditor, Bradley," I whispered. "You looked at my age, but you forgot to look at my resume." I wasn't just going to stop him. I was going to provide a certified delivery of justice that would be impossible to appeal. I'm going to let that sit for a moment. Keep listening. The deeper I dug into the trail, the more the clinical coldness of the audit was replaced by a sharp protective ache. This wasn't just about the numbers on a ledger anymore. It was about the look in my daughter's eyes. Sarah came over that evening. She didn't have her usual energy. She looked like she'd spent the day under a heavy blanket of lead. She sat at the kitchen table, her hands trembling as she held a mug of tea she hadn't touched. "Dad," she whispered, her voice cracking, "Bradley showed me these bills. He said you've been responding to senior sweepstakes mailers. He said you've already sent over $10,000 in processing fees to a group in Jamaica." She slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a fake bill Bradley had planted, a notice of delinquency from a fictitious lottery corporation. He'd even used a stamp with a tropical bird on it to make it look international. "He says we have to do it, Dad. The power of attorney. He says if we don't take control of your accounts by Monday, the lottery people will drain your equity and the IRS will come after the house for unpaid gift taxes. He told me he's only doing this because he doesn't want to see you end up in a state ward." I looked at my daughter. She was mourning me. She truly believed that the man who had raised her, the man who could spot a forged money order from across a room, had been reduced to a victim of a common mail scam. Bradley was gaslighting her as a way to turn her into his primary witness. He was using her love as a crowbar to pry open my life. "Sarah," I said, my voice low and steady, "do you remember what I told you when you were 10 about the post office? You said the mail is the only thing you can't fake because the government keeps the records," she said, a small spark of memory in her eyes. "That's right. And I want you to trust that your father hasn't forgotten how to read those records." I saw the tears spill over then. She was caught between the man she'd married and the father she'd always trusted. Bradley was counting on her grief making her compliant. He was willing to destroy her peace of mind just to fund his gambling debts and his leased lifestyle. The fury that settled in my chest wasn't hot. It was the absolute zero of a deep space vacuum. "I'll tell you what, Sarah," I said, reaching out to cover her hand with mine. "Tell Bradley I'll meet him at his lawyer's office on Monday morning. Tell him I'm ready to simplify. But tell him I want it to be a surprise. I want to see the look on his face when he finally saves me." She nodded, wiping her eyes, unaware that she had just delivered the final coordinates for the strike. Bradley had crossed the one line a postal inspector never allows a subject to cross. He had brought the crime into the family. He thought he was using Sarah as his shield. He didn't realize he had just turned her into my most powerful piece of evidence. I'm going to let that sit for a moment. Keep listening. Bradley spent Sunday night humming in the kitchen, a man convinced he'd just won the lottery without ever buying a ticket. He kept glancing at me with a mixture of pity and predatory hunger. He thought he was watching a clock run down. He didn't realize he was watching a fuse burn. A postal inspector doesn't just catch you. They document you until the weight of the paper is enough to crush your defense. I spent my final free weekend setting a trap that operated on 3 distinct levels of federal jurisdiction. Layer 1, the UV bait. I accidentally left a thick, official-looking envelope from the Department of Veterans Affairs on the hallway table. It was marked priority, special dividend check enclosed. Inside was a dummy check I'd printed, but I had coated the exterior of the envelope and the check itself with UV theft detection powder. It's invisible to the naked eye, but once it touches skin, it stays there for days, glowing a brilliant neon green under a black light. Layer 2, the informed delivery log. I had already contacted my old friend Marcus, a senior inspector at the regional hub. I didn't ask for a favor. I filed a formal complaint of mail theft and identity fraud. Marcus had the smart mailbox Bradley installed flagged. Every time Bradley's phone received a notification that the mail was delivered, a mirror notification was sent to a USPIS surveillance team. Layer 3, the simplification meeting. I told Bradley I'd signed the power of attorney, but I insisted we do it at his lawyer's office, a prestigious firm downtown. I knew Bradley wanted the prestige of a formal signing to make it look legitimate to Sarah. I also knew that a lawyer's office is a neutral zone where suspects feel safe enough to bring their original forged documents. "You're doing the right thing, Arthur," Bradley said on Monday morning as we got into his SUV. He looked at my hands, making sure I wasn't carrying any confusing ledgers. "I just want it to be over, Bradley," I said, leaning my head against the window. "I just want the mail to stop coming." "It will, buddy. From now on, I'm the only one who needs to see the envelopes." He didn't notice the faint, chalky residue on his own steering wheel. He didn't know that by taking that VA dividend envelope from the hallway table that morning, he had literally branded himself as a federal thief. As we pulled into the parking garage, I checked the hidden burner phone in my pocket. One text from Marcus: "In position. The bag is open." I looked at Bradley. He was checking his hair in the rearview mirror, adjusting his silk tie, looking every bit the successful son-in-law. "The mail always finds its way home, Bradley." "What was that, Arthur?" I said, "I hope the lawyer has a good pen." I'm going to let that sit for a moment. Keep listening. The lawyer's office was a shrine to billable hours, all glass walls, polished chrome, and a view of the city that made men like Bradley feel like they were already standing on top of it. We sat around a massive quartz table. Sarah sat next to me, her eyes red, her hand clutching a tissue. Bradley sat across from us, the power of attorney documents fanned out like a winning hand of poker. "Arthur, I have reviewed the documents Bradley sent over," the lawyer began, sounding remarkably like a man who didn't care where the money came from as long as the check cleared. "This will grant Bradley and Sarah full fiduciary control over your estate and pension. It's a standard move for families looking to simplify." "It's the only way, Dad," Bradley said, sliding a heavy gold pen toward me. "Sign here and the lottery people go away. I'll handle the mess." I didn't pick up the pen. I leaned back, and for the first time in months, I let the confused retiree mask fall away. My posture straightened, my eyes cleared. "I have a few questions for the record first," I said. My voice had reclaimed that cold federal snap. Bradley blinked, his smile faltering. "Arthur, we've been over this. You're just getting overwhelmed again." "I'm not overwhelmed, Bradley. I'm an inspector, and I've finished my audit." I pulled a small, high-powered UV flashlight from my breast pocket and clicked it on. I swept the beam across the quartz table. The room gasped. Bradley's hands, which were resting near the documents, were glowing with a brilliant neon green luminescence. The VA check envelope he'd stolen from my hallway that morning was tucked into his breast pocket. The green light bled through the fabric of his expensive suit like a radioactive stain. "What is that?" Sarah whispered, her eyes wide. "It's called theft detection powder, Sarah. It's used by the Postal Inspection Service to track unauthorized access to federal mail. Bradley has it on his hands because he stole a bait envelope from my house this morning. He also has it on his steering wheel, his gear shift, and undoubtedly on the forged statement of benefits he gave you last week." Bradley surged to his feet, his face turning a dark mottled purple. "This is a setup, you senile old—" "Sit down, Bradley," I said, my voice dropping an octave.
I've spent the last month documenting your simplification project. I have the digital logs from the USPS informed delivery showing you intercepting my checks. I have the ESDA scans of my kitchen table showing where you practiced my signature. And I have the commercial mail agency records for the synthetic identity you created to drain my credit. I looked at the lawyer, whose professional mask had completely shattered. You might want to reconsider your client list, because in approximately 30 seconds, this room is going to get very crowded. The door to the conference room didn't open. It was bypassed. Marcus and 3 other inspectors in tactical vests, gold shields glinting on their belts, stepped in. "Bradley Miller," Marcus said, his voice echoing off the courts. "You are under arrest for 18 U.S.C. Section 1341, mail fraud, and 18 U.S.C. Section 1708, theft of mail. We have the warrants for your home office and your P.O. box." The scene was a flurry of motion. The expensive silk tie Bradley was so proud of was used to steady him as Marcus spun him around. The click of the steel handcuffs was the sound I delivered to hundreds of criminals, but hearing it for Bradley was the most satisfying final delivery of my career. "Dad?" Sarah was sobbing, but it wasn't the grief of the last 2 weeks. It was the shock of seeing the wolf finally caught in the light. "I'm sorry you had to see this, honey, but I told you, the mail is the only thing you can't fake. The records are always there." I watched them lead Bradley out. He didn't look like a high-powered insurance adjuster anymore. He looked like a man who had realized he'd tried to scam the one person in the world who literally wrote the manual on how to catch him. I stayed in the office just long enough to collect the forged documents. They were evidence, after all, and a postal inspector never leaves a crime scene until the mail is properly sorted. The house feels bigger now, but in a way that allows for more light. The smart mailbox has been removed, replaced by the original heavy-duty steel box I've had for decades. The digital locks and cameras are gone. I prefer the sound of the metal latch clicking shut. It's the sound of a closed case.
The federal system doesn't move with the frantic energy of a gambler. It moves with the slow, crushing weight of a steamroller. Bradley's legal team tried to argue that he was merely managing the estate, but when the prosecution presented the ESDA results and the UV-stained clothing seized from his home, the defense collapsed. Bradley is currently serving 7 years in a federal penitentiary for mail fraud and aggravated identity theft. Ironically, his only connection to the outside world now is through the very system he tried to subvert. Every letter he sends and receives is inspected, logged, and stamped. He finally has the simplification he wanted. Sarah and I are in a period of restoration. The betrayal left deep marks, but the truth acted as a cauterizing agent. She spent weeks going through my sorting room with me, not to check my sanity, but to learn the trade. She realized that my obsession wasn't a symptom of age, it was a shield. We've spent the last 6 months untangling the synthetic credit lines Bradley opened, a tedious process that requires exactly the kind of patience I've spent a lifetime cultivating. The military pension has been restored. The clerical error has been corrected with a formal letter of apology from the VA. The house is secure, the title is clear, and the Mustang is back in the garage where it belongs. It's Tuesday morning. The air is crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and the first hint of spring. I'm standing at the end of the driveway, the gravel crunching under my boots. The mail carrier, a young man named Marcus, who reminds me a bit of myself 40 years ago, pulls up in his LLV. He slides a bundle into the box with a practiced flick of the wrist. "Morning, Mr. Sterling," he calls out with a smile. "Morning, Marcus. Stay safe out there." I take the bundle back to the kitchen table. I sit in my usual chair, the one where Bradley once tried to gaslight me into oblivion. I open my black moleskin. Postmark April 21st, 2026. Origin, Regional Hub 3. Contents, bank statement, garden catalog,
letter from the USPIS Retiree Association. I record the entries with a hand that is perfectly steady. People might still drive by and see an old man meticulously logging his mail. They might think I'm living in the past, clinging to a medium that the world has outgrown. They're wrong. The mail is the heartbeat of the law. It is the physical record of our promises and our debts. And as long as there is an envelope to be opened, there will be someone to make sure the contents are true. I close the ledger and click my pen, the heavy gold one Bradley tried to use against me. I kept it as a trophy. The audit is finished, the books are balanced, and the inspector is finally ready for his tea.